Donald Glover just retired Childish Gambino. After more than a decade and a half releasing music under the name Childish Gambino, Donald Glover has decided to step away from the alter ego, with Bando Stone and the New World marking the end of Childish Gambino.
Community was my career. I loved working there, and then by the end it was a job.
Is your next album really the last album?
And personally, I'd be lying if I said this wasn't an amazing album. Usually I'm somebody that on a first listen, for whatever reason, I just don't connect with the album. But this one was different. This album is subsequently one of the most beautiful and most chaotic albums I've heard this year. And in a way, I think that's a great metaphor for what Childish Gambino's career has been. But let me not get too ahead of myself, and let's just talk about everything. It all really began 6 months ago, when in an interview with TMZ, Donald Glover announced that he had some new Childish Gambino music on the way, which came as a surprise to many, including myself. Of course, Donald Glover hadn't formally retired as Childish Gambino, but it certainly felt like it sometimes. Not only did he seemingly talk down on being a rapper, he also didn't make music. Outside of a feature here or a feature there, Childish Gambino had basically disappeared, and personally I think it made sense. After years of releasing music and not being as respected as he deserved, I feel like Donald Glover lost a little bit of the love he had for music.
But I have the same amount of BET awards as Sam Smith,
especially in terms of rap, where his displeasures were voiced very vocally. But it didn't matter now, because the year was 2024 and Childish Gambino was ready to return. Not only would Gambino return, he would return with 3 new projects, one being known as Atrevista, which was a quote-unquote finished version of 31520, an album that Donald Glover apparently only released because he thought the world was going to end, which I respect, because even though it wasn't finished, I liked a lot of the songs on 31520. Another one was a collaborative project with Zach Fox, which we haven't seen yet, and of course, Bando Stone and the New World, which would release on July 19th, 2024. And personally, I think this album was great. Coming into this record, I had no idea what to expect. Of course, I love Childish Gambino. When I got into hip-hop, Childish Gambino was one of the coolest rappers ever. And if this was gonna be his quote-unquote last album, I was definitely going to listen to it. From the single and the previews, I really didn't know what to expect. And honestly, if this was truly going to be the very last Childish Gambino album, there had to be some pressure here. Like, it wasn't necessarily make or break. Childish Gambino's legacy is already cemented. But the final curtain is almost as crucial, if not more crucial, than your first impression. Which, if you don't believe me, look at Childish Gambino himself. A lot of people hated Cant, and his career turned out great. And I'm not saying that if this album sucked, people would remember Childish Gambino as an artist that sucked, but they would definitely remember that his last album sucked. And even aside from that, this is just a historic moment in music. Childish Gambino has been one of the most iconic acts of the 2010s and the 2020s so far, and if you're around my age, Childish Gambino has been somebody that's been the soundtrack to your youth. So you just kind of want this to be a good farewell, kind of like when Kobe scored 60 to go out, you know what I mean? And here's what I thought of the record. By the way, real quick, I would just appreciate if some of you hit the subscribe button. At least if you like videos like this, I'm working hard to put them out every single week. Of course, you don't have to, but I'd greatly appreciate it. And if not, I'm cool with the like too. All types of supports are appreciated. First track of the album wasn't necessarily helpful in terms of figuring out what was going on. Of course, I eventually figured out that the title of the song was Hearts Were Meant to Fly, but you know, it was a bit difficult because this song was my introduction into the chaoticness that this album was going to have. It's very Jesus-like in a way, which I know is lazy, and there's probably better comparisons out there, but that's just how I felt in the moment. And the rapping here is pretty decent, I'll say that. And the contrast from the first song to the second song is almost night and day. Because I'm not saying that Lithonia is necessarily the most peaceful song. Like, I wouldn't necessarily describe it as a garden, but it's kind of like a road nobody uses, you know? Sometimes you hear a car, but it's not that bad. And the buildup of the song is insane. And I should mention that it's something that the album does very well. it always builds up, especially on the tracks that start out more peaceful. And I think that's what I appreciate about this record the most, is that it has a lot of versatility. It can definitely be jarring at times, especially because this album has 17 tracks in less than an hour, but it truly does work. There's just something about an album that can go from being Yeezus to late 2000s indie pop rock band that just so happened to go mainstream for some reason. Time to check out 4 songs. Here's the 4 I recommend. Number 1 is Running Around. This is one of my favorite Childish Gambino songs of all time already. I don't know, I just really like the sound. I'd follow that by listening to Real Love, because I like that one too. Of course, Lithonia is one that you should check out because it's more easily digestible than most of the album. And last but not least, the most Yeezus of all the songs, A Place Where the Heart Goes. And I think it's just what Gambino is all about. But I do have one criticism of the album, and it's that I just haven't seen Bando Stone the movie yet. And I feel like watching the movie is something where I can go, yeah, this is an even greater album. But it's one of those things where I won't know until I know, you know? And if this is truly the end for Childish Gambino, then truly this was a great career. Of course, I'm not gonna go as far as to say that all Gambino songs were perfect, but there were a lot of them, I'll say that. And as someone who has followed his career basically since I got into hip hop, I gotta admit that I'm kind of sad to see Childish Gambino go. However, I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Glover returned to music relatively soon. Like, personally, I'm just hoping that he drops the alter ego, not music as a whole, because the world needs Childish Gambino, or it needs Donald Glover more appropriately, I guess. And personally, I just think it'd be a disservice if it wasn't. I don't know, I guess now I just have to see the movie and see if it enhances my experience with this album, which I hope it does, because if the movie is anything like this album, I think that I'm really going to like this movie. And honestly, this might seem like overreactive, but this is my album of the year, at least so far into the year. And if you don't like that, man, go argue with the wall. Nah, just kidding. But yeah, that's my album of the year. And maybe I'm wrong, but that's the way I see it right now. Anyways, yeah, I kind of forgot that Childish Gambino was dropping tonight. So I listened to the album at like 4 a.m. when I was about to go to sleep. And then I was like, no, this is a great album and I should definitely make a video about it. So I stayed awake. I wouldn't recommend this. It's like 6 a.m. I've been on, I haven't slept since I think I woke up at 1. So yeah, no, I would not recommend. But shout out to Childish Gambino. Shout out to Jay Dilla. Shout out to God. Shout out to y'all. And of course, shout out to me. And yeah,